Go for it. Oh, and I'm going to, you know the drill already. I'm going to try and edit out as much of my voice as I can. So if you can repeat back as much of the question as you remember
Okay.
at any time. I'm just gonna come
Sure.
All right. Go for it. So just a consent to use this, your name, and a consent to use this in whole or in part for Lead the World.
Sure. You have my consent to use this for Lead the World.
Perfect. All right. Within the context of human rights, what role do you feel music plays?
Well, I mean, I think that music can be a champion for human rights. It can also inadvertently trample them, not physically, but in terms of minimizing people's struggle or unfortunately giving a one-dimensional perspective of what people's lives are or who a people are, which is part of dehumanizing an individual. Before you take something from them, you have to, or before you kill them, before you conquer them, before you can subjugate a people, you have to, in some way, shape, or form, dehumanize them. So I think music can create an image of a people who is a little more complete. I mean, that is a little more complete, and that way you get a little more of a humanizing element. Or if they have no control over the culture, then it becomes a marginalizing one.
Just gonna double check that this is. Yeah. Okay. What context do you believe hip hop? What role does hip hop play within that context?
Well, I mean, I don't think it plays a singular role in that context. I think that hip hop um, can easily be both sides of that. You know, I think that it can ennoble people, it can educate people, it can inspire them, and at the same time, it can placate and it can pacify and it can mislead people. I mean, you don't have to have any expert come and tell you that. You just have to look at the way that it's played out in terms of the splintering of the genre after it was hijacked by corporate forces. There's no nice way to say that, but after it was hijacked by corporate forces, I feel like hip hop definitively was marginalized from being the voice of the people. There's definitely something about it that individuals who just wanted to make a profit didn't see as viable. And maybe that's been not just hip hop's problem. I think that's maybe shallow to dump it on them, but that's a part of a human condition as well. You know, rather than evolve when the human being becomes comfortable, they think they don't need to evolve. You know, the next step of evolution, the next step of science, the next step of what? Is to minimize the waste that you have. But if you're making so much money and you don't give a fuck about the waste, then what do you need? What does it matter? You know? Then you say, hey, I'm the head of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Who the fuck are you to lecture me? I'm making money hand over fist. So that becomes the Trump argument, even though everything you're doing is wrong, polluting the environment, destroying everything. So the analogy holds clear to music when it becomes, oh, well, I'm just doing whatever I want. I'll just say whatever I want, do whatever I want with no repercussions. Well, there are repercussions because you're normalizing the way that things are interpreted by people that watch and listen to your music. And I don't think that it means that every artist is by definition a social activist, but you know what? You have the capacity to be that 10 times more than anybody else because you have what everyone else is screaming for, an audience. You have people that listen to you, that believe you, and the power of perception is everything. You know what I mean? For example, you wouldn't kill someone over this piece of paper, right? I don't see a lot of people doing that. But people die over this piece of paper. It's just the perception of what one thinks one is worth and what one knows the other one isn't, because they're both actually worthless pieces of paper.
Which way do you feel that music can be used as a tool to raise consciousness in first and third world nations? And do you feel there's a difference in that approach in both?
Well, I think that question about how it can be used really negates history because it has been used. No one can argue that it hasn't been used. Over the course of human history. I mean, it doesn't matter what civilization. The only reason that some of those are lost is because they've been wood instruments, or they become instruments that have been able to disintegrate over time. But all the early peoples of history had an oral tradition, that came in some sort of rhythmic format. They told the history of their people, they told the history of their tribe or their clan or their family or of humanity. Everyone has a creation mythology. Everyone had to use their imagination in some way, shape, or form to come to terms with that. And what's interesting is that music, for it doesn't matter whether it's first world or third world people, has always been a learning tool. It's always been an association tool. It's always been something that we use to grow. I mean, a world without music would be empty for humanity. And I think that what's sad about it is when we find ourselves on the border of being able to expand humanity, and then we're held back by limitations that have absolutely nothing to do with what's best for us. It's just about what's good for business that we've created, or for a society that we think needs to be preserved, even though it's become cancerous to humanity. I mean, at that point, whether it's one thing or another, I can say that over the course of human history, definitively music has been used as an educational tool. It has been used as a war instrument. Throughout the ages, people banged on drums or played trumpets loudly or adorned their armor with dents or holes that made noise when they charged the enemy. Whatever you do, whether it's rhythmic or not, people think that music is just noise with rhythm. I mean, it's a lot more than that. But at the same time, you can create music like sound in primitive society. You can date it back then, and you can see what it inspired people to do, to rally a group of people to war, to welcome people coming home, to celebrate an occasion, whether it's a birth or whether it's to honor someone in passing and in death. I mean, I think it would be pretty hard to argue that music isn't a part of that. And I think the best way, I think, to probably create that bridge in between the knowledge of self and obvious self-determination that people want to build and music is obviously to put messages in the music that are positive ones, not ones that rip you apart all day long, but, a healthy balance of ones that are suggestive of things that people want in life, and then suggestive of what people need.
Do you feel that most American hip hop artists are ignorant of their impact on third world youth in terms of culture, philosophy, sexual expression?
I don't know why they would be expected to be more, you know. I mean, we're talking about being self-aware. How many people really are self-aware in life? Is that something we can strictly put on Americans? I've had this conversation with people before about the perception of American ignorance. And, you can find ignorance in so many different dimensions. Just because you go to a small village somewhere in West Africa and you find an old man who's a genius, but he can't read, does that mean that he's ignorant? Well, yeah, he's ignorant because he can't read a book that a child here could read and pick up Dr. Seuss. So by definition, I guess we could call him that. But he's probably the wisest man that you and I will probably ever run across because of the experiences and things that they've gone through in life. So I think it's difficult to measure ignorance in the sense of a blanket statement like that, even though it sounds nice when people like to criticize hip hop, because they say, "Oh man, the American artists are so ignorant." No, 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 no. Meanwhile, you go to any country and you can find ignorant things that people believe that are totally against, rationality or humanity, without even bringing a dogma of religion into it, because that would just make it too complicated to deal with. Because human beings are unfortunately threatened by the beliefs of other people. It's not. It's almost like an insecurity that's drilled into humanity. I believe in what I believe, but because you don't believe in what I believe, I don't like you anymore, or I feel like you're a threat to me, so I need to eliminate you. Is that where we are? Isn't everyone guilty of that sort of ignorance? I don't necessarily think we are more than less responsible for that, but at the same time, there's still no denying that things from the first world are definitely popularized, and they're given a sense of marketing and real money behind them that other people don't have, and therefore they're capable of being popularized a lot more than someone else's ideas. So that's definitely something to take into account. But I couldn't say one way or another whether someone is more malicious than another individual. I mean, now that's just semantics based on someone's personal experience.
Well, I would say that working in, because I work with hip hop artists from the States and and of different ethnicities in the States and as in Africa, South America, a lot of different people. And I find that particularly the French market, they tend to be more politically aware of what's going on in their vicinity, in their region, and also what's happening in the States.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in the mainstream French hip hop, like on the radio, you would hear much more politically charged stuff than I hear on the radios here or in Canada. Do you think that American hop artists are aware of the different struggles that are happening in Africa and Latin America and the Middle East?
That would be difficult. Yeah, I don't know what their relation is to their own country. That's obviously something completely separate, and I guess only a person who lives in France could really understand that difference. But whereas they're a person from one country is more aware of things that go on in the world, I don't necessarily know. I mean, you're asking me to look into someone else's mind and answer for the whole of the United States. I know this much though, that people don't necessarily rhyme about what they think or what they believe sometimes, and that's something that I think needs to be taken into account. I know people that don't rap about anything that has to do with knowledge or wisdom, and yet you ask them to speak about a political topic intelligibly, and they can talk all day because they love that and they're interested in that. Or people that they have a flashy demeanor, but they're really generous and kind, and they give to charity a lot, even though they dress like a prince or something like that. I mean, who knows if that's just their conscience, but I think it's very hard to assess whether one country is just more knowledgeable or understanding, because that implies that you have to have knowledge of self. And if that's the case, then to assume that one country is more wicked than another based on the wars that they've been in, or the wicked things that they've done. I mean, if we look at the history of France and America, I mean, France is probably the reason, or a lot of the reasons that America exists. France is also an incredibly violent country, and I don't think it really has the leg to stand on to criticize America's violentness. I remember I told the people here when they were upset about the Iraq War, and they said, listen, oh, that's freedom fries. We don't want anything to do with the French anymore. I laughed at them. I said, listen, you're confused about how things work. The French are war masters, but the Iraq is not their slice. When Sykes-Picot was announced and the French and the English and the Russians decided to tear apart the Turkish Ottoman Empire, what happened? The Russians took the Caucasus, which they still believe is theirs. Believe me, they went to war over Georgia, and they had a war in Chechnya. They've been going and having consistent issues in that region because they really believe it belongs to them because it was promised to them. And what happened? The British then got Egypt, Transjordan, Jordan, Palestine, and what's today Israel. Then, of course, the French got Syria and Lebanon. When you talk about Syria and Lebanon, yeah, they want to go to war. When it's about a country that they have no interest in, that they passed on their interest, that at least Britain has passed on its interest to the United States, what does it matter? So I guess it's a matter of perception. And I can use that small, tiny historical example to just note, sure, I mean, one people can have the idea and can be more completely, and this is no denigration to anybody, whether it's American MCs or French MCs, someone could be very, very knowledgeable about history, but whether it's applied to an individual and themselves is one thing. Whether it's resonating in a person's music is another. I think that it'd be hard to categorize an entire group of people and say that they care just because someone's radio structure is different in terms of what they allow. That doesn't really mean anything. That just means that the radios, their numbers are based on something different. See, the radio here isn't based on culture, or it's not based on knowledge or politics or people needing to do that to get on the airwaves. No one gives a shit about that here. It's just based on numbers. It's an algorithm. It's a system. You know, if you can get more people to listen, that means that we can charge more for the ads, and that means that guess what? We have more radio space, we have more radio time, we have more advertising, we have more people that hear us. In a quasi-socialist country where, you know, the radio isn't run by multinational corporations and it's sometimes a government-run station, then you'd be surprised what can get on the air. I mean, look at me. I'm hardly ever on New York radio, and where I sneak on when one of the DJs shows me love. But I would be in another market completely in America, and I'll be blasting on a radio in prime time because I'm just there, you know. So I guess it really depends.
Do you feel that it's important for Western artists, particularly American, but not just Americans, to make themselves aware of the different struggles that are happening around the world so that they can better speak for the people who are voiceless?
See, it's a shame that some people are voiceless because it shouldn't be Americans having to speak up for anybody. You know, the person who creates a situation or whose country creates a situation is not always the person that's going to fix it. You know, if you're looking for someone to be in a situation to be some sort of rescuer for the world, you're not going to find that here. You're going to find people that are climbing over one another to try and be successful. But in terms of what their responsibilities are to people, I mean, I think everybody should be more aware about what goes on in the world. I don't think that just goes for here. I think that if people in the third world were more aware of American politics, they would realize and they would see the coming tide. Oh, this person's in office now? Oh, well, I know what faction they support in my country. Guess what's going to change here? So, I mean, sure, you could play it both ways. A person from a third world country who finds out how the political climate is going to change because their sponsor state has different politics, I think that's evident and clear. But I think the opposite is definitely true as well. I think that it is in everybody's best interest to learn more about the world and especially more about different cultures, about the origin of music. I mean, it's an oral tradition. It comes from the drum, specifically from West Africa. I mean, I think that there's an incredible wealth of knowledge that I think people unfortunately deprive themselves of when they close themselves off and act like this is the only place in the world. You know, this is a culmination of so many other cultures and so many other societies. I think to reject that is to reject the concept of America in itself. And I think the problem is that it's just in the framing of the argument. You know, if this was really the land of the free and everybody, whether they were Ethiopian or Chinese or, you know, Russian or Dominican, and they landed here and they got treated exactly the same way, you know, then that would be wonderful. We would have created something new. It didn't matter where you were from. But unfortunately, the reason that couldn't have happened is because when the first person stepped off that boat, they were stepping on the land that was stolen from indigenous people, a problem that's common to not just the United States, but also to Canada and a large other group of countries in the world. But I mean, and also it was a country that was built with slave labor, which enabled it to get a leg up on other republics that were building up from nothing. They also got into 2 wars too late, you know what I mean? And cleaned up behind everybody else. So I think that what's interesting to look at is the history of a country when you look at the amount of the amount of unique experiences from far off lands and unique people from far off places with which this country would not be possible. You know, even the foundation, even the Revolutionary War wouldn't have been possible without other countries. You know, World War II, we always include the fact that America, Britain, France, but you wouldn't have driven Rommel out of North Africa without, you know, 2 million African troops, and we hear nothing about them through history. So I think it's incredibly important for anybody, doesn't matter where they're from, to do some severe research because it does add dimensions to the human experience.
What do you think right now is the biggest positive and negative impact of hip hop being syndicated around the world? Like the BT culture, I would say.
Well, I don't know what you mean by BET culture. What is that?
the I guess for example, I work in many different countries, but in Dominica, which is a small little country in between Martinique and Guadeloupe, interviewing the head of police there and some of the social workers and youth workers, what they've seen is hypersexualization of the youth as young girls are watching these booty videos, and a lot of gang style violence that had only just begun as BET began to be syndicated there. So that's one negative, but there's also a lot of positives that have come from that. What?
But you're talking about a West Indian country, a quote unquote West Indian
Yeah.
country that doesn't allow cursing. That's one of them countries where you can't curse on stage. You go to jail. Some shit
No,
like
no,
that.
no, definitely not.
But it did. There are what is it?
There are countries like that. I
there
don't
are
know
a few
which
others in the
ones.
West Indies that have that little. There's that old joke that Paul Mooney used to say.
Mm-hmm.
He used to say that West Indian people were stuck up because the white people dropped them off first. I used to laugh at that, but I mean, I don't make stereotypes or generalizations about people. It's just a funny joke. I don't know what their experience is with that, to be honest. And if some foreign element came from another country and all of a sudden people were dancing suggestively and it was my daughter, I'd be upset at hip hop too. But doing the research and the knowledge and looking at the foundation of what the culture is and saying, okay, this is what actually hip hop is, and it was about respecting women and finding a way that we lost back in the day because we were colonized not just by physical force but by our religion, on our beliefs, by our culture, by our economic system, and of course by our relationship with our women, last but not least, of course. So if we're going to free ourselves, hip-hop's idea and answer to slavery of the mind at that particular point was to say we need to create a completely separate type of relationship with our women. So if they don't see that and they're not getting that history and that context of it, I could see why someone, doesn't matter whether they were from the West Indies or whether they were from any other country, could see a culture that has been bastardized, appropriated, and then showed up on my front door. It's like, that's fine, you know. You'd love to see your relatives, wouldn't you, come to visit? But if they show up drunk and fucked up, then it's a problem, right? So hip hop, we don't mind you being here, but if you show up drunk and fucked up, then there's a problem. I can understand why someone would be slightly perturbed. What they don't have the right to do is judge a people or judge a culture based on the worst examples that someone else has hijacked because it isn't the vision of black people anymore. It isn't the vision of American black people anymore. So I think that creates a difficulty in the way you frame the question. What would their reaction be? Well, of course, there's going to be some sort of issue there because already, you know, you got two people that can start a fight in a room based on the different football teams that they root for. So right now, we're trying to find commonality based on a whole new set of of cultural implications that come along with the music. You know, that, oh, those are American black people. They're not West Indian black. Oh, those are African people that speak French. They're not black people from France that speak French. I mean, it's that sort of thing which you understand what I'm saying. That idea that, well, one of us, even though we look the same, is better than the other, when in reality you're both human beings, and because one of you adopted a culture sooner than the other. You know what I mean? Please don't think that no one's dancing suggestively anywhere in the West Indies because that's how that place got populated. Okay? Sure, people are dancing suggestively everywhere. But I mean, I think to blame one genre, I find that a lot. I find that hip hop becomes the scapegoat for a lot of things. And it's just based on the interpretation of what it is and how it shows up. You know, it's like saying that I don't like this food, and it's only because it's been served rotten to you your entire life. You know, you've never really had that food. You just had a rotten version of it.
Are you aware of artists like DJ Awadi who are using hip hop to mobilize the youth vote across Africa? How do you think that could be applied elsewhere to create revolution?
Well, it's funny you say that because I just met another artist from Sweden named Timbuktu, and we were having a conversation the other day about that specific thing, about how in Sweden and other countries in Scandinavia, there were artists that were getting a lot more involved with the way that music was done and how it reflected in terms of the political structure of the country they're in. And I think in terms of Africa and Latin America, I mean, in a society that we think is more corrupt, but it's not that it's more corrupt. It's just that it's more obviously corrupt. Here, corruption just costs more money. It's still the same damn thing, you know. They say it's corrupt because you get stopped in the street and you got to pay the cops off. But out here, you know, you want your business to run right. You know what I mean? You got to pay somebody off. You want things protected, you got to pay somebody off. If you're in the government, you want things to go to your way. When those budgets start getting drawn, somebody's got to get paid. So I think that the real question is, can these artists stand the test of time? Are they going to be relevant for one election cycle? Or are they working on long-term projects to make sure that not just them, but the people that they represent, the youth that comes behind them as well? Because I think that's the short-sightedness of some activism. The leaders of the movement always feel like they're going to be in charge, and it's like at some point you have to train the youth to take the helm. You have to trust people. You have to be able to delegate responsibility. At some point, you become so old, you become the oppressor, motherfucker. People need fresh, new ideas. So not just, you know, being part of the government, or not just affecting government, but directly affecting the youth with music would be one of the most powerful things. And whether that happens in Europe or America or in Africa or in Latin America, you know, I think that's essential in this day and age. That's part of our written tradition. And our unwritten tradition, our oral tradition. You know, when we were dissatisfied as human beings, we have to let our voice be heard. To not allow that is to deny our humanity. You know, only a slave is afraid to ask questions. You know, so why would we be afraid to make a song about these things? You know, you can't criticize certain people in your society. Oh, well then you know who your master is. Because unfortunately, if you were able to make a record about that, then, you know, and then of course you get into the theology of it all. There are some people that don't believe that music that doesn't praise God can't be made, that it's haram. And the real question is, if you get to heaven, brother, and someone says you can't get in there because you made a rap song and you did good things with the money, then you don't have to worry, because you're not in heaven, and that's not God.
What do you feel? No, forget that one. Do you feel that artists have a responsibility to be leaders in their communities? And if so, what do you see as that responsibility?
If they choose to. But I mean, again, it has to be on a person. You know, you're thrusting an individual in a marriage. Because two people have sex, you think they should be married? No. I'll answer that question for you, because you're smart enough to know that that's the fucking only answer that's viable. No, but at the same time, you know, if an artist isn't ready for that yet, why would they be cast into that light? I feel like if an individual is at a moment in their life when they want to do that, maybe they're not ready to do that when they're 18 and 19 years old. But maybe once they've been in the game for 15, 20 years and they're 35, 40 years old, maybe that's the time when an artist will say, hey, now I got kids that are coming up listening to this music. Now I got people in the hood that I've known whose kids are getting shot, and instead of there being anything that I can listen to that's positive, I listen to the music they listen to now. And it's not the music I grew up listening to. It's some old reckless, you know, nonsensical stuff that doesn't have any context. What can we do to change that? Is that their role? Probably a lot more than the other one. But I think that it's difficult to tell young people how to act at all. Because if they're not going to listen to their parents, you know what I mean? They have to listen to someone they respect, someone they trust. And more certainly, this than anything else, someone without an agenda. Someone that doesn't have a vested interest and isn't trying to sell them anything. That's what they want to hear from.
What do you think is the potential potential impact of hip hop artists in not only in the third world but around the world? And what do you hope the legacy of hip hop to be?
Well, I hope the legacy of hip hop will be that it stood on the right side of humanity. That even though it had its stumbles and its pitfalls, that it dipped into selling its soul for money. That if it can be redeemed, then anybody can be redeemed, you know. And I don't think it's ever a lost cause. I mean, I was never in the faction of people that felt like hip-hop was gone or it was dead simply because it lacked enough of a representation from a certain genre or from a certain area. I mean, I think that hip-hop will continue to metamorphosize over the years. And I hope that carried along with it, irrespective of the presentation of it, the way that it'll be dressed up, hidden within the folds of that is a music that believes that sedition is rational when approached with tyranny, that revolution is necessary when the people are downtrodden, and that we can do nothing without knowledge of self, that we don't have any perspective without being self-aware, that we're powerless without that perspective to help us, guide us in our way, because we don't even know where we are, so how the fuck could we know where we're going? You know, I hope that it teaches us these things. I hope that it reminds us in the coming years, or years from now, people are watching this when we're all fucking dead, and they say, you know what, here's a group of people who refused to go quietly. You know, here's a group of people that said something was wrong. We're not just going to shut up about it for whatever that was worth. You know, if our society is controlled by people, then we'll be in some fucking museum saying, oh, look at these rebels. This is how they existed. But maybe it'll spark the mind of someone years from now who says, well, this empire is weak and it's deficient and corrupted, and it's been like this since then. Or maybe it'll be in a museum and we'll look back on it and we'll laugh and say, listen, these were all the problems that humanity had at this particular time. And this is how we can remember these people. This is how we know how they lived, you know? And let's not pretend that the rich ones lived any better. They were just as jealous, just as corrupt, just as grimy, you know? And we saw that mirrored in the music. That's who the poorest of the poor emulated to be, you know? The rich gangsters. And after all, gangsters run the world, you know? Not just gangsters, no. Gangsters.
Where do we go from here?
Well, I'm going to lunch. I don't know where you're going. But I would say that it's ultimately your decision whether you want to make a change in the world or not. You know, it's no one can force you to change. Just like, you know what, you can't force anyone else to change. You can't ever change someone's mind. Don't think that you can. Don't think you're so powerful. Don't think you're so clairvoyant. Don't think you have any hidden mental abilities that we've all lost over the years that you discovered in a fucking cave and have been passed down over generations to your special bloodline. You're not special, okay? You can't force people to change their minds. This government and all the governments that have existed throughout the existence of humanity have been studying and trying to find ways to change people's minds without them knowing that they're changing their mind. Because the thing a human being will be the most rebellious about is when someone forces them to change their mind. You can't even force a slave to love someone. You gotta give that to someone themselves. So I just caution the people out there when they're out there trying to force people to open their eyes and realize it. A person has to be led to that position, you know. They have to want that. It's not something you can just implant inside them. Maybe in the future that will change. Maybe there'll be a GMO revolution, huh? Not an organic one, where we just motivate people to be angry because they're just so pacified and quiet that they'll accept anything. But as of now, in 2014, you can't change people's minds. You can ask them to think differently, and you can push them and give them the facts that will make them recognize that there's a better world possible. But ultimately, the decision to sacrifice their ignorance, which is a very, very peaceful place to be, is their own. And the real question is, would you step out in the rain if it was raining truth? or would you stay nice and warm and dry?
I have just the plugs to do that.
Sure.